Find the domain and range of the function graph below. Now, the domain of a graph is all of the x values that have an associated y value. So for instance, if I chose -1 on the x, it has an associated y value, which is +3, so it's part of the domain. -3 on the x actually isn't part of the domain because we have this open circle right here, so it's not really part of the domain, but all of the points up to -3 would be. We also would like to point out here that there is an arrow here indicating that the graph continues in this fashion to infinity. So it's going to continue this line right here to positive infinity. But we could also assume that even if the arrow wasn't there, because only if there is a closed circle or an open circle should we assume that the graph actually stops at a particular point. So we can assume that the graph doesn't continue on this way because of that open circle. But if this arrow wasn't there, we would just assume that it continued on in the same fashion as well. Now, if you want to get a visual understanding of domain and range, one thing you could also do, instead of just trying to pick out all the x values that have an associated y, is to just take all the graph and just imagine it being smashed up against the x-axis. And if you smashed everything up against the x-axis, the resulting set of numbers would be the domain. Likewise, if you smashed everything up against the y-axis, the resulting set would be the range. Let me demonstrate what I mean there. So here's the same graph, but drawn in a different program so that we can interact with it. And what I was explaining is you can visualize the domain if you just think of everything in the graph being smashed up against the x-axis. So if you just press everything together with like a trash compactor or something. So if you can imagine a trash compactor smashing everything in the graph up against the x-axis, the resulting set is the domain of the graph. So the domain here is going from -3, but not including the -3 because of the open circle, and going off to infinity. Similarly, we can do the same for the range. If we take the same trash compactor and press everything up against the y-axis instead, the resulting set would be the range. And this range starts at -5 and goes all the way to positive infinity. This part right here actually should have an arrow on it indicating it goes to infinity, but because it doesn't have the closed circle stopping us or the open circle stopping us, we have to assume that it goes off to infinity in that direction. So as we said, the domain of this graph is the set of all values starting from -3 but not including, going to positive infinity. And the range is the set of all values starting at -5 but not including, and going to positive infinity.